Each day on Idaho Matters, through a wide range of topics, you'll hear from neighbors and friends about the ever-evolving social and cultural landscapes of Idaho. Listen to the Idaho Matters podcast at boisestatepublicradio.org today. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Cadet. This is Idaho Matters. For 30 years, Edward S. Curtis photographed Native Americans living in the early 20th century. His pictures, which documented the daily lives and customs of many tribes, would later leave him with a complicated legacy, some claiming that his portrayal of Native American life reduced his subjects to a stereotype. Well, today, Diné photographer Will Wison is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and offering a new lens through which to view indigenous communities in an ongoing project known as the Critical Indigenous Photographic Exchange, which is currently on view at the Sun Valley Museum of Art. And Wilson is joining us now to talk more about this. It's really nice to have you on the program.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
So can you start out by just telling us a bit more about what initially inspired this project?
I think it's just, being a photographer and being an Indigenous person who's interested in their representation. I knew about the Curtis images from when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And just thinking about those people and sort of the remarkable individuals who were imaged by Curtis in that project over, almost 30 years. I just wanted to know more about the stories behind those people. They're remarkably resilient folks who are going through some intense times, land loss, sort of the boarding school era is kicking off. Thinking about how to give voice sort of to those histories is something that I think kind of initially inspired me to do this project.
So talk to us a little bit about the project itself. And can you start with when you first started taking these series of portraits?
Yeah, I kicked the project off in 2012, actually at the Santa Fe Indian Market in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at the New Mexico Museum of Art. I had been wanting to do a portrait project for a long time, and I was actually tapped to curate an exhibition of contemporary Indigenous photography, but at the last minute we lost our venue, and so we were trying to figure out if we could pivot. And I had been wanting to try this historical photographic process for a long time. So I pitched the idea of a sort of photo booth project and put the word out on Facebook because during the Santa Fe Indian Market, an amazing sort of cohort of Indigenous scholars and artists come to Santa Fe. And I knew that would be a great moment to sort of start a portrait project. And, I thought about it more and I was like, oh, well, I'm learning this beautiful sort of alchemic historic process. And it takes a while. It takes about 30 minutes to make an image of somebody. And you have to have a darkroom with you wherever you go. That's why it's called wet plate.
Okay.
So you're making your own film essentially, and the emulsion has to stay wet. So you make your image, and then because you have a darkroom there, because if it dries, you don't get an image. I can invite my sitters to come in and actually experience this 19th century photographic process, which is really beautiful to watch. And then in the end, I was like, well, I get to have this experience with this person. We're making this image, in a digital age. Why don't I gift this image to the sitter in exchange for a scan of it? And so it's like this sort of reciprocal gesture, and hopefully it troubles the history of photographs of Native folks.
What's interesting?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, what's interesting to me, not to interrupt you, is that I think even if people don't know the name Edward S. Curtis, they would recognize many of his photographs of Native Americans. And what's so, I think, fascinating is when I look at your photographs and just that process you just described, you have a similar in the sense that it looks more black and white, right? But
Mhm.
why was it important to you to not only look really at these photographs from Curtis that I think really gave many of us an idea of who Native Americans were, right? And
Mhm.
how they lived. Yet it was very stereotypical of I think how so many people even to today view Native Americans. Why was it important to you to almost take these images back and really give Native Americans agency?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's this sort of mythologic image of indigenous folks,
Mm-hmm.
and that Curtis's images sort of re reproduced that idea. Even then,
Mm-hmm.
he was sort of trying to make this image of a people who existed in a past, even though they were very much sort of contemporaneous folk doing modern contemporaneous things. He really worked hard to sort of keep any evidence of modernity out of those images.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from the start, it's been sort of this strange anachronistic sort of project. But yeah, like knowing that that's still kind of, at least, you know, 10, 15 years ago when I started this project, like that was the prevailing image of indigenous folks. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to sort of reproduce those images, but then kind of trouble them, right? Like have people show up however they wanted. So, there might be like iPads in the image, or um, people might be wearing business attire. And because it's a 19th century photographic process, it immediately, I think, sort of registers as historic image. But then you're seeing these very modern people in those images, and so I think there's this strange cognitive dissonance that occurs, and it's interesting. To me, it was exciting, and it points back to that history and this notion of stereotype that
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to kind of break apart. Um,
And why is that important to you? I mean, in particular, being part of the Navajo Nation, right? And this idea that as I mentioned, I think still a lot of people hold
mhm.
around who Native Americans are, right? And neither whether it's not wanting to or not understanding, but really not educating themselves about Native American culture, Native American life.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about kind of imaging people as like foregone.
Mm-hmm.
That's problematic. There's a certain violence, I think, to nostalgia, especially
Mm-hmm.
when you're thinking about like indigenous folks who are very much, present, who have like political organizations and modern day economies. And I think sort of imaging indigenous folks as like having have been but not present was a way to sort of ignore things like treaty relationships, land kind of issues that were and are still sort of prevailing. It was sort of another form of settler colonialism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
sort of a visual manifestation of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, one of the ideas behind the project is to sort of be critical of that practice. But another idea is to just kind of share this amazingly beautiful process and kind of talk about what photography kind of was and has become. And I should be clear that like this isn't just a project of images of Native Americans. Like
Right.
anybody's invited to be part of the project. So I think I'm going to get to sort of produce it this summer at the Sun Valley Museum of Art. And, it's really open to anybody who's interested in kind of the history of photography or representation. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think about the project as really kind of broader than just a critique of what Curtis was doing.
Hmm. Well, and I do have to say, I mean, you just describing the process of the photography that you do is so incredible. I mean, the fact you just said you need a dark room. I mean, I don't know if kids these days know what a dark room is, right? We all take pictures on our
Mm-hmm.
phones, so just that process is so beautiful. So thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to come out and talk about the work and hopefully do it this summer.
Well, we appreciate you so much. We've been speaking with Diné artist Will Wilson. We've been talking about the Critical Indigenous Photographic Exchange Project, which is currently on display at the Sun Valley Museum of Art. Thanks so much for listening to Idaho Matters. Boise State Public Radio and Idaho Matters are members of the NPR network. It's an independent coalition of public media podcasters. You can find more shows in the network wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Gemma Gaudette. We'll see you tomorrow.
No matter what happens in Washington, the NPR Politics Podcast is here for you. For the latest news, insights, and analysis from the election and beyond, listen to the NPR Politics Podcast. No matter what happens in Washington, the NPR Politics Podcast is here for you. For the latest news, insights, and analysis from the election and beyond, listen to the NPR Politics Podcast.